everybody. Welcome to our live this evening. Hope you all are doing well. So let's wait a couple of seconds before we get started for today live. Let's go ahead and share this live. All right, everybody. Again, welcome to today's live. Today we are going to be talking about the new dietary guideline. So we're just going to be reviewing the new dietary guideline. I'm going to be talking about the guideline. Then I'm going to be adding my own input and ways to incorporate this new dietary guideline into your daily habit. Because the purpose of this dietary guideline is to ensure healthy American, healthy people. And we are going to be talking in details about this dietary guideline. So you can go ahead and share this link to your friend that you think could benefit from this live information, especially talking about dietary guideline and ways to focus on healthy eating this new year. So I titled this like choosing healthy for health. That sounds very good. Sounds very good. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started in about a minute. So we're just waiting to see how many people who are going to join this live session. I know this is recorded and I'm going to post this on my channel as well. So just waiting for 30 more seconds before we dive into the dietary guideline that was released today. So again, the main focus, I'm going to be talking about the dietary guideline that was released this afternoon. Then I'm going to be adding my own input about ways you can incorporate this dietary guideline into your daily living. So I titled this live, Choosing Healthy for Health. That's the title. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much, everyone who joined this live session. My name is Samuel. So today what we're going to be going over, we're going to be discussing the dietary guideline that was released today. So the way this is going to go, I'm going to start by reading through the dietary guideline each session. Then I'm going to be adding my own input so you can nice and understand ways you can incorporate this dietary guideline into your daily living. Again, the topic for today is choosing healthy for health. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So a little bit about myself. So I am an exercise physiologist. I'm also a coach. And I do a lot of education lecture when it comes to health and wellness. So that's what we're going to be focusing on that today. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Messi, Ed, Samara. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into that. So this afternoon, there was a release of the new dietary guideline. And the goal of the dietary guideline is to ensure healthy American, healthy people, so we can nice and reduce health cost. So for today, I'm going to be talking about each session of this guideline. Then I'm going to be adding my own input and ways you can incorporate this dietary guideline in order to ensure you stay healthy this new year. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So in the guideline, there is a specific picture or specific illustration that was added to the guideline. I'm going to see if I can show so you can see the illustration right there. So you can see, especially whenever we are talking about focusing on healthy protein, healthy fat, talking about vegetable as well as fruit, as well as focusing on whole grains. This is the main idea of the dietary guideline. So now what we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about each section of the guideline. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So now whenever we're talking about the first section of this dietary guideline, the first section focusing on eating the right amount for you. That was how this is written. So instead, I would have said choosing the right amount of food for you. So why is that important? Especially whenever we are talking about weight management in relation to choosing the right amount, whenever we are talking about right amount of food for you. For example, in Japan, there is an idea called avib. I don't know how to pronounce that. It's called Hara Avijbu, which is the idea is about just eating until you are 80% full. Instead of just eating until you feel 100% full. For this Japanese idea, when it comes to eating the right amount, they focus on just eating about 80%. So now with this idea of this new dietary guideline, I'm going to be reading what this state. So eating the right amount for you. So the calories you need depend on your age, your sex, your height, your level of physical activity. It's very, very important to pay attention to portion sizes, particularly for food, beverages that are high in calories. So basically what this session is talking about, especially whenever we're talking about eating the right amount of food. So the focus, especially whenever we're talking about portion sizes differs based on your height, based on your age, based on your level of activity. So now whenever we are putting this together in regards to weight management, some instances, if I know I won't be very active for that specific day, it is ideal for you to focus on less calories, especially for that day, so you can ensure you are consuming lesser calories since you will be less active for that day. So that is the first session of this dietary guideline. So the second session of the dietary guideline focusing on prioritizing protein food at every meal. So now I'm going to read. So whenever we're talking about protein, so the guideline focus on prioritizing high quality, nutrient dense protein as part of your healthy dietary pattern. Focusing on varieties of protein from animal, from plants, which include beans, peas, lentils, legumes, nuts, seed. So the goal, especially whenever we're talking about protein, is to swap deep fry cooking method with bake, broil, roast, steer, or grill. So that's the idea whenever we are talking about the second section, which is prioritizing protein at every meal. So now whenever we are talking about protein, as I mentioned, there are two different types of protein that you can select. You can select what we call the animal protein, or you can select plant protein. So whenever we are talking about animal protein, it's very, very important since the goal of this dietary plan is to focus on healthy eating. So now we want to focus on those lean protein compared to those red meat, because we understand that red meat are associated with what? High cholesterol, which are not heart health, which does not support heart health. That's why it's very, very important whenever we are focusing on protein, we want to focus on lean protein in form of animal and incorporating more of varieties of those plant-based protein, which are what? Heart healthy. So that's the second one. So now whenever we're talking about the benefit of protein, we all understand that protein is a building block when we're talking about repair for the skin, when we're talking about repair for the muscle, when we're talking about repair for the bone, when we're talking about repair for the ear. Very, very important to understand that protein also supports immune system and also improve heart health, which is why it's very, very important to understand, especially whenever we are talking about weight management. Protein also aid in weight management. Very, very important, especially whenever we are talking about weight loss. So we want to prioritize food that are high in what? Satiety, which protein are very good source or high in satiety. Very, very important to keep that in mind. So that's the second session. So now when we are getting to the third session, this is when we are talking about dairy, consuming dairy. So based on the dietary guideline emphasize when consuming dairy, very, very important to include full fat dairy with no added sugar and dairy that are excellent in protein, healthy fat, vitamins, as well as minerals. So why is this very important, especially when it comes to understanding those healthy dairy? Because, for example, when you go to the grocery store, there are different varieties of dairy. Sometimes you are going to see 50% fat free, 25% fat free, 0% fat free. But whenever, one thing you need to understand, whenever fat is taken out of food item, the food tastes nasty. For example, if you get a whole milk and you are trying to remove the fat out of that whole milk, the rest of the milk tastes nasty. So for that milk to taste great, guess what? What we are going to do, we're going to add a bunch of sugar in order for that item to taste good. That's why it's very, very important, especially with this dietary guideline, to focus more on those full fat dairy. Because whenever you focus on those less, like those 50%, 25%, there is a replacement in order to make that dairy taste good for consumption. So very, very important to nice and keep that in mind. So now whenever we are getting to that fourth section of the new dietary guideline, focusing on eating vegetable, fruit throughout the day. So now, how do we incorporate these vegetable as well as fruit? So based on the guideline, let's read the guideline. Eating varieties of colorful, nutrient-dense vegetable and fruit. Eat all vegetable and fruit in their original form. Wash thoroughly prior to eating raw or cook. Then third section, frozen, dry, canned vegetable or fruit with no to very little added sugar when it comes to the emphasis for that specific food. So why is this very important? So now let's break it down. Let's start from the beginning. Eating varieties of colorful fruit and vegetable. Why is that important? Because whenever we are talking about varieties of fruit as well as vegetable, each of them provide us with varieties of nutrients, varieties of minerals, antioxidants, and whenever we are talking about those necessary gut health, talking about fiber. For example, whenever we are talking about those those green leafy vegetable like collard green, kale, those are high in vitamin C, vitamin A, vitamin K, folate, magnesium. And each of those leafy vegetable comes with different vitamins as well as minerals. So focusing on others colorful vegetables, especially talking about radish, talking about carrot, talking about different kind of cabbage, talking about bell pepper, those also provide with fiber, important magnesium, vitamin A, vitamin C, especially talking about the immune system. And whenever we are talking about fruit, each fruit also provides us with different minerals, different vitamins, and different nutrients. That's why it's very, very important to incorporate colorful so you can get each of those minerals as well as vitamin. we're talking about those fruit, we're talking about similar vitamin, talking about vitamin A, talking about vitamin C, talking about fiber, talking about potassium, especially in relation to banana. That's why it's very, very important to incorporate varieties of fruit. Whenever we're talking about seed as well as nuts, talking about vitamin E, talking about selenium, talking about magnesium, talking about chlorine. Very, very important to incorporate varieties as well as colorful vegetable. And whenever we're talking about beans as well as legumes, we're talking about calcium, manganese, talking about folate, talking about phosphorus, talking about iron. That's why it's very, very important to incorporate varieties of those colorful vegetable as well as fruit, so you can ensure you are getting all those minerals as well as nutrients. And whenever we're talking about especially the benefits of those vitamins as well as minerals, those vegetables as well as fruit, we're talking about providing us with essential nutrients, providing us with essential vitamins, antioxidants. So what is the benefit of antioxidant? Antioxidants serve as a protective cell mechanism in order to nice and prevent what from damage. And whenever we and also help reduce oxidative stress associated with aging as well as other chronic condition, especially whenever we're talking about cardiovascular diabetic. That's why it's very, very important, especially whenever we're talking about the session 2, to eat all vegetable and fruit in their original form. For example, whenever we're talking about orange juice and orange, they sound the same, but they are different, especially whenever we are talking about the nutrient content, talking about the fiber content, and the the uh, the addition of sugar in the orange juice. That's why it's very, very important to nice and choose vegetable as well as fruit in the original form. The same thing whenever we're talking about apple juice. Different, especially eating apple raw, you are getting your fiber, you're also getting your minerals. But now whenever I'm drinking just the apple juice, I'm not getting my fiber. And in case of someone who is diabetic, just drinking apple juice can raise the blood glucose through the roof compared to eating an apple. Because with an apple contain fiber. So that's why, especially whenever we're talking about glycemic index, apple juice will have a higher glycemic index. So that means whenever you consume that apple juice, that will raise your blood glucose very rapidly compared to just eating apple by itself, apple raw by itself. So very, very important to nice and keep that in mind. And whenever we're talking about vegetable as well as fruit, we're talking about very high in fiber. And what are the benefits of fiber? Fiber aid digestion. Fiber aid excretion, especially whenever we're talking about stool release, so that your stool can nice and take shape whenever you are utilizing the bathroom. That's why it's very, very important to incorporate those vegetables as well as fruits since they contain high fiber content. Very, very important. And also with diabetic individual, eating fruits in their original form as well as vegetable does aid glucose management. Very, very important. So other session is about incorporating healthy fats. Very, very important to nice and keep this in mind. So whenever we're talking about healthy fat, this is whenever we're talking about whole foods such as meat in the original form, talking about poultry, talking about egg, talking about omega-3, rich seafood, talking about nut, talking about seed, talking about those full fat dairy. So I mentioned that especially whenever we're talking about those 50% dairy, 25%, whenever we are reducing the amount of fat, guess what? We add something in order to make that food taste good. Another option includes some of those butter, but everything in moderation. Very, very important. So now focusing on whole grains. Very, very important. So prioritizing fiber-rich whole grains. Our goal is to reduce significantly highly processed, refined carbohydrates such as white bread, ready to eat, packaged breakfast food, flour tortilla, as well as cracker. So why is this very important to incorporate whole food? Especially when we are talking about the benefit of those fiber when it comes to digestive health, when it comes to microbiome, because the goal is to feed our microbiome. And if we are eating food that are less whole, then we won't be able to nice and give those gut microbiome. We won't be able to feed them. And when we feed them, that's when they are healthy. And when they are healthy, that's why our guts feel good. That's why that reduce bloatness. That's why it's very, very important to incorporate whole grain food. So now focusing on the second to the last section, limiting high processed food, especially added sugar and refined carbohydrate. So I'm going to go ahead and read just based on the PDF from the new dietary guideline before I add my own input. Let's pay attention. Avoid high processed packaged, prepared, ready to eat or other food that are salty, sweet, such as chips, cookie, candy, that add high level of added sugar, sodium, whenever we're talking about salt. Instead, our goal is to prioritize nutrient dense food and home cooked meal. Very, very important, especially. Our goal is to shift away from added sugar and to focus more on nutrient dense home meal, home prepared meal. It's very, very important to also understand whenever we are talking about home prepared meal can also be in form of ultra processed food if ingredients are not fresh or old. That's why it's very, very important. One thing I want you to realize, especially whenever we are talking about healthy nutrition, think about this. Whenever you are selecting an item, your goal is to ensure that item has less ingredients. The greater the ingredients, the more processed those items are. That's why it's very, very important to nice and focus on food that are closer to their original form. Whenever we're talking about the original form, how do they look as plants? How do they look as fruit? How do they look, especially if those are sea organisms? That's why it's very, very important, especially for this session, to limit processed food, especially food that has a lot of added sugar or refined carbohydrates. So then for the second section, limit food and beverages that include artificial flavor, especially whenever we are talking about dye, petroleum-based dye, artificial preservative, and low calories, non-nutrient sweetener, especially whenever we are talking about those artificial sweetener. Very, very important, especially. The main focus, especially for this session, is to focus more on home cooked meal. And whenever we're talking about home cooked meal that originated from whole food, that originated from fresh vegetable, fresh fruit, fresh ingredients, we want to make sure we are reducing how much added sugar those beverages we are consuming, especially even those diets beverages, because those also contain artificial sugar, especially whenever we're talking about aspartame. And what is the long-term effect of continuous ingestion of those artificial sweetener? Very, very important. That's why it's very, very important to nice and pay attention. Or if you need to read from the website, from the CDC website, the new dietary guideline, go ahead and do that so you can nice and understand how this can aid in healthy lifestyle and healthy 2026 for you and your family. So then for the last one in relation to processed food as well as added sugar, avoid sugar sweetener beverages such as soda, fruit drink, as well as energy drink. This is very, very important. So now for the last one focus on limiting alcohol beverages. So based on this guideline, consuming less alcohol for better overall health, people should completely avoid alcohol. So this section just nice and lists uh, several populations that should avoid consumption of alcohol, especially during this specific phase of their life. Pregnant women, people who are recovering from alcohol use disorder, and people who are taking some specific medication that can be a contraindication if alcohol are consumed with those medication. Very, very important to nice and keep that in mind. And why is this very important, especially when it comes to limiting alcohol consumption? We all understand, especially whenever we are talking about liver cirrhosis, alcohol highly contribute to this specific illness or disease of the liver. That's why it's very, very important to prioritize choosing healthy for a better health. So I have several information I wrote down when it comes to the health effects of alcohol, especially talking about the brain, the nervous system, how there can be a altered or lesion in those areas, talking about the mouth and throat, how this can affect this area, especially whenever we are talking about increasing cancer in this area, throat, esophageal cancer, talking about the lungs effect, especially in relation to acute respiratory distress, talking about kidney, how alcohol can change kidney function, making them less able to nice and filter blood, talking about the immune system, how alcohol increase risk of developing infection diseases, talking about the heart, heavy drinking can raise blood pressure, can increase triglyceride, especially whenever we're talking about those bad cholesterol, and can cause lead to several pulmonary infection. Very, very important, as well as heart disease. So talking about the breast, especially for women, can increase associated breast cancer whenever we're talking about alcohol consumption. So talking about liver, I know I've already mentioned in regards to how chronic alcohol consumption can increase risk of alcohol-induced liver disease like those liver cirrhosis. Talking about stomach, especially whenever we are talking about increasing production of stomach acid, which can cause gastritis. It's very, very important to nice and understand how alcohol, especially chronic alcohol consumption, can lead to all these chronic or acute disease. Then whenever we're talking about the pancreas, which pancreas is what is responsible for releasing insulin whenever we're talking about regulating that blood glucose. So chronic or heavy drinking can induce inflammation, pancreatitis, which could affect, especially whenever we're talking about the functionality of those pancreas in production of those beta cells, which are relation to what? To insulin secretion. So very, very important. So those are the main components. Those are the main components of the new dietary guideline. So the main thing, especially whenever we're talking about prioritizing your health this new year, so the main thing, especially focusing on prioritizing healthy eating in form of healthy protein, in form of dairy food. And you want to focus more on those full dairy product, full fat dairy product, rather than those 50%. Because now, whenever we are reducing how much fat inside a product, guess what? We need to add something into it before that food can taste good. So the ultimate of this new dietary guideline is to reduce ultra-processed food. And how do we reduce ultra processed food? Especially reducing how much package food you are consuming in form of chips, in form of candy, in form of those readily available meal on the shelf. Because we have to understand why those are on the shelf, why those last longer. Because, for example, if you cook your own food at home, that food cannot last a year before that food gets spoiled. That's why it's very, very important to understand why can a similar type of food last years in the shelf without getting spoiled and still maintain taste, especially whenever we're talking about those readily available meal. That's why this guideline prioritize home cooked meal, focusing on those home cooked meal. Then talking about limiting alcohol consumption so as to help aid LTU and also reducing those associated disease like those liver cirrhosis or other type of disease. So one thing I want you to think about while I wrap up this live session, especially this new year, focus on choosing healthy nutrition. Because especially whenever we are talking about junk food definition varies from individual to individual. But one thing I want you to think about, for example, it's not cheap. Whenever we are talking about prioritizing healthy eating. But one thing you need to keep in mind, spending that money on healthy eating will help prevent a long-term cost when it comes to illness, hospital bill in relation to what? To disease acquisition from bad eating. That's why it's always very, very important to think about choosing healthy for health so as to save long-term cost. Very, very important. So to close it all out, so very, very important to think about this. Health is wealth. When you have health, that's when you are able to nice and move around. So this new year, choose healthy when it comes to your nutrition. Try not to give your taste bud the control of your life. Be in control. Be disciplined when it comes to your selection. And that's one of the main things whenever we're talking about nutrition. Nutrition always starts with your purchase behavior. Always start. But now whenever you are disciplined when it comes to your purchase, then you won't have those items laying around inside those cabinets, inside those closets. You won't have them available because now when you have it available, then there's going to be a higher urge to nice and grab those soda, grab those chips. So instead, incorporate more fruit and vegetable. Use them as your snacks. Focus on what? Hydration. Focus on hydration. Very, very important. And limit alcohol consumption. Because one thing that was also emphasized whenever we are talking about alcohol consumption, alcohol consumption in some scenario I feel as socialization, whereby it's something that brings people together when it comes to drinking. So this year, what I want you to think about, why can't you focus more on healthy habits in form of socialization so as to ensure you keep yourself safe, keep yourself healthy, especially thinking about how expensive insurance as well as hospital bill are this year. Thank you so much, everybody who joined this live session. Thank you, Messi. Really appreciate you joining the session. Thank you, Maria. Thank you for joining the session. Thank you, Davis. Thank you for joining the session. Really appreciate each and every one of you. And that's going to do it for today. So make sure you nice and subscribe, turn on the post notification so you can nice and see the next schedule live. So often I schedule this live so you can nice and be aware of the time frame when I'm going to go live, so you can nice and join and interact with me during this live session, especially for today, talking about the new dietary guideline. Thank you so much, everybody, and I'm going to see you in my next live. Thank you. Bye bye.